Good morning, good morning, good morning. Welcome to your Labor Day special Mobility Magic on a Monday. If you're just joining us, hey, how's it going? If you're joining us for the first time, you're joining us for the regular session on a weekday on a Monday, welcome. If you're watching us on replay, hello to you. And if you're joining us, thank you very much. I appreciate you spending your your day off with us today. We're going to be working some mobility for hips and adductors. Because I appreciate that if you do all the sessions today on the live channel, if you were getting your workout in, probably a little bit tight in the hips, a little bit tight in the adductors, so we're going to work on that today. As usual, if you have any questions, any thing you'd like us to cover in the next couple of weeks for mobility, feel free to send me a direct message or leave it in the comments of the video afterwards. So lovely to see everyone. Hello, hello. There's a lot of people joining. That's great. And hello, regular people. And as I say, we're going to do adductors and hips. So I'm just going to turn the comments off. And good to see you, Karen. Nice to see everyone. And awesome. So as I say, we're going to do a little bit of adductors and a little bit of hips. Main focus today is to try and loosen up this kind of area to get your squats and deadlifts a little bit more comfortable. So what I thought we'd do is start off a little bit more dynamic, kind of a check-in actually first, just to kind of see. So normally this kind of sumo position is a really good check-in point for the hips. So if you can imagine, if we're just sitting back and down, trying to keep our torso nice and tall, it just kind of tells us how tight our hips are. So if you're getting to about here and you're kind of feeling kick in, especially true if you're sat at a computer all day. So there's a few things we can do for that. First thing is we can work on just getting into this active range, which we'll come back to a little bit later. Just kind of see if you feel like your knee's pulling in slightly, or you feel a little bit pull on the knee. That can be a good sign that maybe you're a little bit restricted closer towards the knee, so more distal from the hip. If you're tight in the hip, close to the groin area, then you might be a little bit more restricted towards the capture of the hip. So if you're sitting a lot, that's normally where you're going to feel it, towards the hip. Now let's start with a little bit of dynamic movement. If you're doing all the sessions today, you may want to keep it as dynamic as possible. So we're just going to start with some big rotations, trying to get the hip up to about 90 degrees. You can use the wall to stabilize if you want to. Up to 90 degrees is where we're getting it. So 90 degrees from the hip. I'll just show you from this angle. We'll bring it around, opening that gate. So starting at the front, bring it up to 12 o'clock, bring it around to 3, and then down again. That's all we're doing. And we're trying not to compensate by leaning too much with the hip. We want to make sure we just go as far as our true hip range allows us to go. Our active range, that range of the hip that we can control. So we're coming up and around. We can also do big circles if you want to do it that way. That also works great, because if you can imagine the ball in the socket wants to rotate as far as it can. It's full range within the given depth of your socket, because everyone's different. I want to make sure that we're trying to keep that foot planted on the floor, keeping that glute engaged on the standing leg. So we're just doing some rotations. This is also really good if you're doing a swimming pool as well. So if you have access to a swimming pool, if you have one yourself and you're blessed to have a little bit of water to play with, this can be really good to get this hip opened up. Okay, so let's switch sides. I'm going to turn around and try not to have my back to you for too long, but we're going to bring this hip up, out, and down. So we're just starting that active kind of movement. And if you feel like there's a little bit of clicking and clunking in the hip, just do it a little bit slower. So we just bring the hip up, around, and down. And you can even do it the other way if you would like to as well. Just bring it up and down. I feel any clicks and pops. Hopefully that's just the joints starting to move a little bit, things starting to loosen up. And again, we don't want to kind of lean if we can help it. We just want to let our hip move through its true range. So we're talking about that active range that we have, control of, making sure we're squeezing that bottom leg. Now, we can do some small circles, which, as you can imagine, if you were doing it in a swimming pool, would work really, really well. And then you can make those circles bigger. Make the circles bigger, bigger, bigger. and see how that feels. So again, this is just getting those hips warmed up. Very often if you spend enough time doing rotations, getting that joint and the socket painted, that synovial fluid moved around the joint, that's enough to get those hips kind of warmed up. So the next thing we're going to do is just do a little bit of a check-in again, just to see if that's enough for you. So again, if you've done enough, you'll find the pinching might have gone from your hips already, which is great. It's a good sign that you might need to do some more rotations. So you're just going to come back and down, see if that has helped increase your depth. It's increased mine a little bit. If you feel it again on one side more than the other, that might mean that you need to do a couple of other things as well. Potentially spend some more time doing these rotations. Alternatively, you could need to do a little bit of stability work, which we'll do later on. So, second thing we're going to do is add in some hip rotations using a chair. So, we're going to set the chair up. I'm going to show you the movement on the ground, just in case you don't have the stability to do this yet. We're basically going to do some rotations. So we're rotating our hip, doing kind of a windshield wiper motion. So before, we moved the hip using the musculature around our hip to control that rotation. Now we're actually moving the hip around the ankle. So we're actually doing this rotation, again using the musculature, but with the chair we're actually going to change it the other way around. You'll see what I mean in a second. So we're going to start with these windshield wiper movements on the floor, just turning our toe in and out. You might feel a few clicks and pops, but that's okay. We're turning that toe in and out on this side too. So this, again, can sometimes be enough for people. Want to try and keep this front knee facing forward if you can, so you're not kind of compensating too much by using your hips to do the movement. We want to use our leg rotating on the socket. So again, this is the kind of movement we're looking for on the chair. So I have a chair here. If you don't already have one, grab one. And we're going to put our foot up front of the chair. So first of all, you want to make sure that you're facing forward. So make sure your hips are a little bit square. And we're just going to start by just turning that toe in and out, just kind of finding where our range is, turning it in and out. So, in and out. Just see how your hip is feeling without kind of compensating too much. Now we're going to turn this toe to open up the gate a little bit. We're facing forward with the hips. I'm still turning that toe, but now I'm bringing that toe to the front. So I'm bringing that to about 12 o'clock and I'm just turning this hip as well. I'm pushing down the chair as I do it. So I'm just pushing down lightly, just so my heel is kind of driving down the hip. It's gonna add a little bit of traction to the joint as well, which is gonna help that stretch. So whenever you add a little bit of traction to the joint as you stretch, you can help increase that range of motion. You can help increase the active range of that joint as well. So we're just turning that hip. As we get to the bottom, as our toe hits the chair, we're just gonna lean away slightly to traction, and then we're gonna turn back. So we're turning in, tractioning, hopefully the chair's not sliding too much like it is mine, and then we're turning back. So turn, push down into the floor. So we want to straighten, push through this hip, push down through this hip too, and then we're turning back. So we're getting a light stretch in the hip, in the groin area, we're getting a light rotation, and we're getting a little bit of traction as well. So all these things combined should help loosen up the adductor, which is kind of what we're going for, and we're trying to get a bit of rotation as well, which is only going to help the health of the hip. So we're turning away. We can also now turn the other way, facing this way, if you have the range and the balance. So, and you can also use the wall as well if you're in this position. So if you get to this position and you can lean, you can push down to the chair and you can bring your hip forward this way towards the wall. That can also help as well to traction that hip out. So let's change sides so you can see it a little bit more clearly on the other side. And I'm not spending too much time doing this one right hand side. So again, starting with our windscreen wipers, if you haven't already done those, we're going to put the heel on the chair. My hips are starting off square to the chair, so my hips are square forward. I'm going to rotate my toe in, and if I can get it to rotate out, and that's external rotation of the hip, that's great. I'm going to try and externally rotate the hip if I can before I turn it in again. So I'm out, I'm in, my toe wants to come towards me if it can. Don't want to have my toe down, kind of plantar flex, I want to dorsiflex, I want it towards me. I'm turning in and out. And as I get more comfortable, as that hip starts to open up and I feel a little bit more range arrive, I'm going to push my hip. I'm going to turn my toe forward and I'm going to turn my hip as well. So as I turn this way, I'm tractioning my hip by leaning away slightly, by trying to keep this hip at a nice tall angle, and I'm leaning my hips this way, so I'm just slightly adjusting. So I'm turning all the way out, I'm turning all the way in, my foot is pointing forward towards the camera, towards you guys, and then I am bringing my hip so it's square. So I don't want to be like bent too far back, because that's probably not going to add the stretch we need, because we want to open this adductor up after all. And I want to keep moving as dynamically as I can by pushing my heel into the chair. In effect, I'm pushing towards the floor. I'm also pulling towards me by keeping my hip nice and straight and this hip off to an angle. So you're probably gonna get about 45 degrees, maybe more if you're lucky. As you do this, you have a tall chair and we're just rotating. Now, as you get warmed up, as you feel this adductor start to loosen up and the muscles around the hips start to allow you more range, you may want to start to turn towards this wall like we did a second ago. So we're going to start to turn our body. We're going to start to add a little bit of rotation, trying to get this hip to kind of move around, feel a little bit better. We're just turning the hip as well. So now I'm on this side. I'm putting my foot or pressing my heel into the chair, which is adding a little bit of traction here. I'm leaning my hip away, so I'm actually leaning this way slightly. I can lean if I need to add more traction. If I have a wall right here, I can lean into that wall too, and I'm going to come back to the start. So let's just do a check-in. Let's just see how we feel. So we're going to put the chair away for a second. Now you can feel free to repeat that as many times as you need to, because that's only going to help you. And we're just going to see our check-in. So again, check-in from this position, the sumo kind of deadlift position. You can also do a squat, but we're just going to slowly come down, see how that feels, sit back into your sumo position. So if you feel a little bit better in that position, great. If you still feel a little bit of impingement, let's move on to something else that's going to help you. So a couple of things you do here. I'm going to choose to do a butterfly stretch, just a really simple one. Back against the wall if you have space to do so. If not, probably against something that's not going to move, like a chair, like a sofa. That also works. So with this one, we're going to want our heels together if you can manage it, or if you can't quite manage it, have it further out. And just gently apply a little bit of downward pressure. So just get the heels as close as you feel comfortable, as long as your back is flat against the wall. That's also important. And we're just applying a bit of downward pressure to the hips, just gentle downward pressure, just so that you're having a little bit of traction. You're getting the hips to stretch slightly in the socket. So this one's a really great one if you have some range that's not really dialed in. So if you have kind of flexibility but poor proprioception of the joint as well, or instability, this can also be good because we're going to apply some PNF. So once you're in this range and you feel a good stretch and you're not forcing the stretch, your body's just relaxed into the range. We can then push our knees up into our hands. So now you can apply a little bit of pressure. You're going to meet the resistance. So you're going to meet that resistance from the hips as we push up towards the ceiling. We're trying to close the legs this way. We're just going to meet the resistance. I'm pushing up with my knees, pushing down with my hands. I'm going to relax. And what you might find is suddenly you get a little bit more range as that joint kind of recognizes that actually it's a safe place to be, and that kind of restriction goes. So we're going to do it again. Apply a little bit of downward pressure, a little bit of traction, feel the stretch on the inside of the hip, the groin area. We're going to push up. We're going to feel that resistance being met, and just let that stretch kind of hang out. You can also use the forearms if you want to, but you want to make sure that your back is always flat against the wall if you can help it. And the last thing I forgot to mention is making sure you're breathing as well. So as you breathe out, add that push downwards. You're going to push your knees upwards. Apply that traction. Take a nice breath in. Breathe out. Feel that stretch. You can shift from side to side if you need to, and then just relax. Now, second part of this is you can pull down to the floor as well. So if you have, imagine you have the musculature of the adductors is under tension, but we're not having any contribution from the adductors, so the abductors on the outside. So we're going to push down with the outside. We're going to push up on the inside. We're going to push down on the outside. So we're going to keep doing this kind of contract, relax on the outside, pushing up. Or pushing down on the outside, and we should feel a little bit more range arrive in the hips. So you should feel a little bit more open. Now you can apply that as many times as you need to. Main thing with this is just to make sure you breathe. So last one in this, next piece here is, if you have an opportunity that's localized with the tissue, we can potentially use the foam roller as well. So we're going to quickly do that. If you have one, great. If you don't, no problem. I'm going to use my foam roller to just get kind of into that joint area. So if nothing that we've done so far has worked for you, a foam roller could be a good option. It's not always the best option, but it could be a good option. So all we're going to do is try and have it as close to the hip as possible. I'm just sat on top of it, and I'm going to start to turn my hip across it. So I'm leaning my weight forward and back. I'm rolling across the adductor. Adductors on the inside here, so magnus gracilis, etc. And we're rolling back a little bit into the hamstrings. So if you notice my body position here, I have one leg, so this is my left leg out about 90 degrees, and I have my other leg kind of straight out to the side, and the leg that I'm actually adding the kind of localized pressure to is the hip that I want to stretch. So that's my right hip, and it's my adductors close to the hip socket that I'm putting pressure on the foam roller with. So again, rocking backwards and forwards, making sure all the pressure is down on the foam roller. If you need to push it up to elevate and add more pressure as you turn, you can do that too. And I'm just kind of easing off that pressure on the adductors. Now, if you would like to add more resistance, like a little bit more stretch, you can push the foam roller away from you as you add down pressure from that leg, and that should add a little bit of a stretch as well. So again, turning away from it, leaning across, and I'm also rolling backwards and forwards. And a combination of those different things will help to ease that pressure on the hips. So I'm just turning my body away. So it's a bit of a rub your tummy, pat your head kind of affair. We're just turning our body away, pushing that foam roller down the leg a little bit as I apply downward pressure. And I'm getting that hip to kind of open up. That's it. So let's switch sides, and I'll explain it again just to kind of make it a little bit clearer. So we're making sure that this front leg is about 90 degrees. We're getting this left leg straight out to the side, probably around a similar angle, if not a little bit more to a little bit straighter. My hip is, or at least my foam roller is up towards my adductor, to kind of the origin up here, and then I'm turning out slightly, and I'm also kind of tractioning away. So we're turning our body out, we're rolling away from where the foam roller is resting, or our leg is resting on the foam roller, and then we're leaning forward and back to kind of go across the adductors and the hamstrings, which should help to kind of unglue that area. And I'm lifting my hip, I'm turning my body away. So I'm coming in, I'm coming out, I'm coming in, I'm coming out. So you can also use your toe, if that helps, as kind of a rudder. That heel is like an anchor point, which is going to help you kind of control how far you're going. And if you need to add more weight, you just push your hips up, and you can lean your body weight away from your heel as well. That also works fantastically well. So we're trying to get the hip and the tissue of the adductors to kind of loosen up a little bit with a little bit of down pressure, and also this rocking backs and forwards is going to help you as long as you're breathing. So make sure you take a nice deep breath as you do it. Okay, turning away. And a combination of those things is definitely going to help loosen up. So let's lose the foam roller quickly. Let's come into our adductor series stretch, which is going to be kind of a clock face stretch. We're going to start off with a little bit of a 90-degree angle. So we're going to bring our foot forward. We're going to start by rocking our hips slightly forward, just to kind of check in, see how we're doing. And we're going to kind of come around that clock face that we've done so many times before, just by leaning our weight forward. So my torso is going to stay as straight as possible. It's going to just rock forward. My back leg is feeling a little bit of a stretch, but I'm going to try and come as far forward as I can over my toe, And as soon as I feel that a little bit of resistance go, I'm just going to move out to a new angle. Now you can follow the clock all the way around. You can do the minute hands or the hour hands. It's just wherever you feel that there's less resistance as you kind of ride around the corner. If you need something underneath your knee, because I appreciate that some floors are quite hard like mine, then feel free to add a yoga mat or a yoga block, and we're just working around that clock face. Okay. We're just coming around. So now we're getting towards that 9 o'clock spot, that 90 degree mark. This is where we're going to transition. So if you know what to do, go ahead. If you've done this goalie stretch type thing before, this is a really good one to help really open up and get those hamstrings and adductors kind of opened. So we're putting our hands down on the floor to create a nice stable base. We're rocking back, making sure that our hips are aligned, and we're just letting that stretch work through as we rock back. And it should feel the stretch on our left hand side. So as we rock back, our toe is starting to turn up. Now if you don't quite have the range yet, if you're still feeling quite a deep stretch, keep that toe down, widen this hip out a little bit, and then just work within the range that you have. So just feel the stretch, keep it dynamic, come forward a little bit more, come back a little bit more, and now start to add in that toe. Turn, 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 turn. What's that? Excellent. So now that we've gone from that position, let's transfer it to the other side. You should feel a little bit more open on this one side. Just through doing that dynamic stretch, should feel a little bit better. So now same thing, we're just coming forward on this one ankle. If you don't feel like you have enough range, you can add a little bit of downward pressure on this front knee as well. So you get a little bit of an ankle stretch too, which is great. So just working around, we're gonna work around this 12 o'clock to 3 o'clock now. So we're coming around, we're just working this foot round, and once you kind of feel this stretch and this hip kind of open up and you gain more range, that's where you want to move. So you want to take a nice deep breath in. Breathe out, nice deep breath in. Breathe out. Always breathing all the way around as you come around. I'm going to shuffle across in a second so you can kind of see a little bit more clearly. And we're just walking this foot around. And if you feel like you get to a sticking point, just come back a little bit more, hang out in front of that range that you kind of feel is got stuck. So we can hang out a little bit more here. If let's say my hips got stuck right here, I'm just going to hang out, I'm going to breathe, I'm going to make sure that my torso is nice and tall. I could even add in a weight here as well, and often that helps to, like a kettlebell or something, or a dumbbell, that often helps to kind of help loosen up this area as well. So I'm just going to walk it around. Start to feel that I'm at about 90 degrees, so I'm opened my hip from 12 to 3. I'm going to shuffle across so you can see. I'm in this position. I can then transfer my position to a long leg or kind of a goalie stretch position. And I'm going to make sure that my hip feels the stretch. So I'm making sure that I'm coming back in straight line with my planted knee. I'm rocking back. I'm rocking back. I'm feeling a stretch on the inside of the hip. It's a little bit of traction. If I add a little bit of a hip lean this way, I should feel a little bit of a stretch on the inside of the capsule, the hip capsule. I should feel a little bit of traction, which should help that stretch. So I'm now biasing diagonally towards that hip as I stretch back. And I'm going to turn my toe up to the ceiling. So I'm coming back, turning my toe up. As I rock backwards, I'm feeling that heel dig into the floor. Excellent. Bit of a rotation. I'm pulling my toe towards me this time as I come back diagonally. So I'm really pushing that heel into the ground. Excellent. Now I'm going to come back to a kind of tactical frog position, you could call it. I'm just going to rock back and just see how I feel. I can push my hands into the floor to push me down further into that hip position. Feel a light stretch. Keep my head neutral. I can come back and forward slightly So I'm going to come over the top of my knees and bring my hips forward so my hips start to rotate open. I can then come back again. And this is just going to help rotate the femoral heads or the heads of the hip to an open position. And I'm going to push myself a little bit deeper, and then I'm just going to come across the top of my knees. And I'm trying to get my hips towards the floor as best I can. And you don't have to push it too far. We're not trying to go for extreme range here. We're just trying to open up those hips. And we're just coming back and down. So let's see how much. So we have about 4 minutes. So we're going to work on a little bit of stability just to see if we can help affect those hips to help improve that sumo position, that squat and that deadlift. So the first thing we're going to do, if you've done this before, is we're going to apply a little bit of a squeeze. So if you grab your foam roller or a ball, we're going to squeeze the foam roller with our hips as hard as we can, with our legs straight out to about 90 degrees. You can also do it in this position too, with your heels down. And we can also do it in 2 other positions. So put your hands out in the crucifix position. You're going to either have your heels on the ground and squeeze with your legs biased to one side. We can then rock to the other side. Squeeze it that way. If you don't quite feel it, you can also do it straight as well with your tube kind of a little bit wider, squeezing as hard as you can, making sure that we can get those heads of the femur to sit squarely in the socket. Next thing you can also do to add a little bit of nutation is to push your knee towards you and your foot down into the floor, meeting that resistance, and then switch sides. So I'm pushing down to the floor and trying to get my hip off the ground without actually moving my hip off the ground. And I'm trying to push my knee towards my shoulder with my hands pushing down towards the other wall. And I'm going to do that a few times. And then I'm going to see how my hips feel. So let's do a little bit of a check-in. Let's put the foam roller to the side for a second. We've done a little bit of stability work towards the end there, just to kind of see how our hips feel. So we're just going to check in. Now we'll also finish with a little bit of dynamic kind of movement as well, just to see how the hip feels. We've done a few different things, but we want to check and see how that sumo position feels. So again, nice and wide. You could also do a squat position too. Again, we're focusing on the adductors today, so you're just going to start to sink down to see how low you can go, how low that feels. We can also turn to the side, see how straight our back is as well, because that's also a useful kind of check-in. So we want to make sure that as we come down towards the floor, we're kind of remaining somewhat vertical if we can. So we're just sinking down, 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 down. So nice deep breath in, eyes head forward, just sink down. And again, if you need a weight to kind of help you, that's okay. Just making sure that our hips feel good, and we've increased the range of those hips with the adductor stretch. Now, if you want to return to that dynamic stretch as well, that hip opener, that can also be a good time to do it too. And all of these things you can do in a quick pre-workout format as well. You just move a little bit more dynamically. That's also going to help you to open up those hips. Also going to help you to keep that synovial fluid moving. It's also going to help you if you're doing post-workouts or recovery as well. So again, dynamic movements can help keep those hips nice and healthy. Synovial fluid, just work within the range that you have. And we want to help keep those hips nice and healthy. So again, see how you feel. See how that improves your stretching, your mobility. And I'm just going to turn the comments on as well, just so we can chat. And again, if you have any comments, any feedback, anything you'd like us to focus on in the next few sessions, feel free to message us or message me directly on my Instagram at Fascial Stretch Simon. We'll be back again next week at 11:30 for another session. Hopefully your hips are loosened up a little bit. And if you have anything, as I say, you'd like us to cover in the next few sessions, feel free to message me directly. And I'll check you next week at 11:30. Have a great rest of the day, and see you soon.